What do I always say?
Bonjour mes amis.
Hi guys!
There you
On
go.
location today. So maybe we'll get to see this tablecloth more often.
Well, hopefully so. If you'll have me,
If it goes well.
if it goes
If
well,
you will have me.
if we don't fight by the end of this video,
We are
because
sponsored by a
because
new brand of water. It
It's-
has a dodgy color.
it has a dodgy color, but apparently
Dodgy
it's
color.
super effective against COVID-19. So we'll make sure that we'll have plenty.
Yeah,
of
we should have a
intake.
sip, make
Yeah.
sure.
So
Because
there
we're
we
going to
go.
be sharing straps and cases.
Okay, so do you mind I call you Uptick and I
Well,
introduce
what should I
myself
call
as,
you?
Johnny
Johnny?
Johnny Guitar, yes.
Johnny Guitar. Oh yes, that's your handle. That's
my
what you
handle,
use
yes.
to comment on my videos. So
Indeed.
yes, we met through the comments. And,
Exactly, yeah.
How long have you been in Hong Kong?
Been in Hong Kong for 7 years, and before that I was in Singapore for 7 years. So it's starting to accrue a little bit in Asia. The great thing about this is both cities are watch mad and watch maniacs. So
Singapore seems very expensive.
it really depends, right? So if you're going to normal retail, yeah, it can be pretty punchy because it's also a high net worth country, and it's probably not quite as competitive as Hong Kong from that perspective because it's a smaller market. If you go to second-hand stores, you do find some really interesting things. The tip there, if you're ever going to Singapore, is to not go to those massive shops on Orchard Road or
Right.
whatnot, because those ones are not going to be any more interesting than you would find them in Europe or in the US. Maybe you will be able to negotiate a little bit better of a discount. There's probably a little bit more flexibility about that in Asia because it's in a culture to hackle about price, and and if you try to do this in Paris or Belgium or wherever or London, people will insult you and kick you out of the store. But where you want to go if you're there is you want to identify all of the really rundown shopping malls, because in almost every one of them you're going to find at least one watch dealer, hopefully an older guy who's not on internet all the time.
Right.
And you might actually have quite good value for what you're going to buy, and I had some extremely good deals. Now that was a few years ago. Again, I came to Hong Kong in 2013. I'm not sure exactly how the market is these days over there, but you can find interesting stuff in Singapore. But I would rate Hong Kong, far and above any second-hand market in the world, just because it's one of the largest market in the world. Before the protest hit Hong Kong, Hong Kong was the largest market in the world, with the US number 2. Being a byproduct of this really being an extension of the Chinese market. So you have so many Chinese coming and buying their watches. So there's deals to be done in Hong Kong. There's deals to be done in Singapore. They're both incredible. If you are into watch and you just take public transportation, sometimes my jaw hits the floor when I'm seeing what people are having in the MTR, which is or the MRT in Singapore, which is the local subway. Because
Right.
you find people with tourbillon watches, from very very good brands, or perpetual calendars or whatnot, and you're like, I can just not imagine these kinds of watches being worn in the metro in Paris or the subway in London. I mean, the probability of getting mugged is just enormous.
Well, that's the safety issue, and then there's not many things they can spend money on.
Hong Kong being one of the most expensive places in the world to live, just because the rents are just so huge, and the rents are huge and the taxes are relatively low. So it's almost like a transfer of wealth. If you compare to Europe, instead of going to the state, it goes to the people who control property and by extension the city. But because of the fixed cost of rent, because you cannot avoid that, or buying a house, which is also incredibly expensive, the cost of everything else is going to be low, right? So the wages have to be able to compensate for the cost of the housing and the low taxes as well. Meaning that if you compare the net price of a watch in terms of the number of net salaries, you can probably afford a lot more in Hong Kong than you can anywhere in the West, where the tax rate is
Yeah,
higher and so forth. So which is the reason why I know you're mentioning it on every video, but basically a Rolex sports model is a secretary watch in Hong Kong. I've got like 4 examples just in my company of personal assistants, and they're wearing. One of them is wearing a GMT Master 2. Another one is an Explorer. Another one has got a Submariner, and the other one has a Yacht Master 2 for good measure.
It's a weird thing because we all talk about Rolex day in, day out. We want them, we lust after them. But then you realize that if you wear a Hulk, you're going to have basically a student's watch here in Hong Kong. It's not special at all. And then between the guys, I think most of the people are going to wear the real thing. And then some people are going to wear the fakes. Nobody can tell the difference these days. And then you're going to wear one. It's not going to be special for both reasons, because anybody and their mother have one,
Yeah.
and then the other people have a fake one, and then so you're just going to look like one of these people. So
No, exactly.
and that's why I think we're looking at different things, and this is probably the one of the very best thing you could possibly look at right now. My favorite release of last year. Actually, I brought one Rolex with me. This one is a bit more special, being the Sea Dweller 4000.
Yeah, this is a wonderful
But
model. Yeah.
true story, I said on the channel that right in the mall where I work, I went for lunch, and that's the watch that the waiter is wearing. Not to be disparaging, not to say anything negative about that, but just to say that people know their watches and they don't have that many ways to spend money, and they know that you can wear them for free. That guy is very smart. He puts his wage in that, and if I was smart like him, I would have done that 20 years ago. My first wages, if I had put them in watches like these, I would have worn them, enjoyed them for free, and made money out of it. So
It's interesting you should mention that, because
Good
I
on
just
him.
went to a restaurant at my club nearby, and the guy who was tending to me, he was wearing a Deep Sea. So that's exactly what you're saying, right? So it's I don't think that the Deep Sea is it's a bit of an acquired taste.
you can wear it. I mean, you can show your wrists.
Actually, I've got a very average wrist size for my size. I'm 1 meter 83, which is exactly 6 foot tall. I'm about 92 kilos, and I wish I was more like 87. But
Yeah, but so you're a strong guy. You have strong wrist, and we were talking about it last week. Is that we have the same size of wrist, 17 centimeters, but we wear watches sort of differently, because you're a tougher guy, so yours are rounded, and I'm tall, and mine are completely flat.
So mine is actually it's actually interesting, because I measured it again the other day, and what I recalled, because I did buy a strap, a made to measure one a few years ago, and I measured it back then, and I measured it again. It's more like 17 and a half than 17. But the thing is, you and I've been thinking about this a lot, about what, and especially when it comes down to this watch versus some other competitors in that price segment, and why it was that a watch fits and a watch doesn't fit. Even if we measured it and it was true that my wrist is a half centimeter bigger than yours, I think you can get away with a bigger watch than I can, because your wrist is quite flat. It's quite thin and it's quite flat, meaning that even a larger watch is going to sit correctly on you, whereas mine is pretty round, meaning that if the case is too wide, if the lugs extend too much, and then there's a third element that people sometimes don't appreciate, is also the shape of the case back influences a lot how a watch is going to wear. So it's really
Rolex is very flat.
except for a Sea Dweller.
Yeah, there you go.
So the Sea Dweller. So for instance, I had a Sea Dweller reference 16660 that I bought probably about 8-9 years ago, and that I sold or traded 8 years ago, and it's actually one of my regrets. I tend to not regret the watch I let go of. This one I do, because it was just fantastic, and for me it's the ultimate diver. Be it the 666, the one after the 16600, the one you have. For me, the one you have and that you've just shown is the last great Rolex diver, because everybody is complaining about what they call the super lugs on the Submariners. It works extremely well on this watch because it's a bigger, thicker watch to start with. So having those thicker lugs actually work quite well on this watch, in a way that I think don't work as well on the simple Submariner. So that for me,
these are not as thick as the Sub yet. That's why it stood out a bit, I think.
So what you would have there is it's
not like a big pancake. Really.
No, it's not.
There's
It's
not
not
much.
big, but you can see. But it sticks
Just
out
slightly
compared to
Yeah.
Submariner. And I recall when I was wearing mine, because the two previous generations had that too, where actually any generation, even the 1665, had a protruded case back, but of a different shape, more rounded. So to get away with this kind of watch, what you need to have is your morphology and your bone structure needs to allow for it, meaning that
There you go.
your
That's the right one, but
yeah. So
Very
if you
flat
have
one.
enough space between the two bones for the case back to just sink in, it's going to sit flat on your wrist and it's going to be comfortable. If you have it just a little bit too small, what's going to happen is going to sit on top of it, and then it's going to try to turn all the time, because this is a fairly
that's
top
driving
heavy
a lot
watch.
of people mad. I think the watch is turning, especially if you wear them on a strap, which is going to be very light. Then you get no counterweight here. With the new modern clasps, you have a big counterweight, at least for the watch, and you can wear them a bit tighter.
But that's the reason why, for instance, I have to wear my watch tighter than you do. You can see I've got the mark there, and the reason for that is not really this one, because this one is incredibly
Fairly
light.
Yeah.
But for any sports model that's in steel and on a bracelet, I have to wear it reasonably tight, because otherwise, because my wrist is round, it's going to start naturally turning around the wrist. Whereas if you have a flat wrist, you can probably allow 2-3 millimeters more without it turning necessarily, because it's on a flat section. So that I think is.
You remember our parents or dads, they were wearing the watch is very loose, and sometimes I do it. And actually, if you go in the cold water, like I have the Tudor on the wrist, if I go in the cold water, the wrist is going to contract so much, then it's going to be super loose. It's going to touch my hand all of a sudden. I'm going to show you the watch I'm talking about. The one everybody wants. You see, you don't have to have a Rolex. You can have a
Tudor.
Tudor. But there's no easy link, unfortunately. So I keep it slightly loose, but I just came from outside to your place, and now it barely moves. I can put a finger now with the aircon running. So and it's okay, I was kind of obsessed with the glide lock and the easy link on my Explorer. I just love it. I use it all the time.
Yes.
And yet I survive. I've been wearing the Tudor black base, the black and the blue, for the past 2 months non-stop, and I feel good.
Look, it's honestly, I think the glide lock and this kind of extension links that you have in the Rolex, they're great. Really, they truly are. Especially if you travel a lot. And what happens to me typically is when I take a flight, I tend to do a whole lot of water retention, and I expand. The fact of having a system which allows you to very quickly adjust it by a half centimeter is great. But I don't think it's an actual must-have. As long as you have some level of micro adjustment, even if it's just 3 holes, it's enough. And I'm at the point right now where it annoys me so much when it doesn't, because I've had so many watches which was like that would
Queuing the Aquaterra, which
exactly.
could have been perfect, but you need a screwdriver and the extra link.
Yep. But I have a Grand Seikos that are like that.
The Snowflake.
Yep.
Lovely, super light, thank God, but I could never get the right half link.
Well, actually, I need to show you this one, because that actually stands a reason, because you're talking about the Snowflake, and I've got something that's almost similar. The SBGA125, which is basically the same layout, the same level of finishing. It doesn't have a bezel, so you have like an exposed crystal on this one. But the bracelet is okay, but the problem is you just don't have any adjustment. So yes, you do have a half link, but for me the half link doesn't make it, because I'm either too loose on the full link, or I'm a little bit too tight on the half link. It's not that difficult. It just requires a little bit of creativity compared to what they've done, like on this watch, on the movement, on the finishing of the case, the dial, the hands, and all that, which is probably second to not many other manufacturers. But you look at this, like for instance, Lange just came out with the Odysseus in just last year in steel. Controversial because it's not exactly what people expected from a so-called sports luxury model.
They're gonna love it.
But at least the adjustment in the clasp, where you just have a button that you press and releases it, you can do this in 1 second. It's just great thinking, and this is really having the wearer and the consumer in mind, and I just find it really interesting that something as critical as wearability and comfort sometimes takes a back step compared to everything else, because it's critical. It's critical that.
But that's all about longer, I told you my 1815 calendar has the side pusher to readjust it. We're just talking about calendars and the new GLC chronograph calendar, and you're gonna buy it not thinking how bloody annoying it's gonna be for you if you have a rotation of watches every time to readjust it. Doesn't matter if it's annual, because my friend who has the 5146, the annual Patek, he we were all in awe of his watch, but I see him wearing his Milgauss here and there, and I'm like, I was telling him, I'm considering your Patek as well, and he's like, yeah, I love it, but it's just so annoying. Every Monday I have to use the side pusher or turn the crown. That's going to wear out the movement, and then I don't wear it, and then it's even worse. And if you have the moon phase, then it's twice worse, because readjusting a moon phase every time, going back to the new moon and trying to count the days, you're never quite sure it's quite right. So you want to get it right one time and then let it be. So the longer with that side pusher, which feels great as well, just readjust everything, is just it's a blessing, because I kind of I don't hate it, but my Zenith chronograph, Chronomaster, every time I pick it up, I have to readjust it, and it's wearing out the pushers, those side pushers, which Patek still use.
But they're tiny too.
They're tiny.
If you don't use the risk of scratching the watch is super high if you don't use the right kind of pin to get in. So yes, that's exactly the kind of.
And the push has to be just right. If you don't push far enough, you risk to lock the movements. You have to go far enough to the point of, usually after a few pushes, the toothpick is gonna break. Usually, I need a couple of toothpicks to get through 15 days unworn.
Yeah, it's interesting, the lack of thought about how do you make a watch convenient to use.
User friendly.
It doesn't matter if it's an entry watch or a high-end haute horlogerie watch. I mean, especially in haute horlogerie watch, if they're going to be investing this kind of money, developing functions and movements and all that, they have to think about the ergonomy of it and how it's going to be used down the line, which is it's one of my things right now. I've been collecting watches for 20 plus years, and I'm getting at a point right now where I know my taste so much that even the slightest thing that doesn't work for me, I'm just not going to go for it. There's a lot of choice, and it's also a function of getting older, because you're getting older, and you just know what you like, and you know what you don't, and you know what you can compromise on, and you know what you can't compromise on. And at this stage, for me, comfort trumps almost anything else. So the story behind this watch